happened on Friday night. The administration fired several inspectors general without giving Congress the 30-day legally required notification.
And you all have credentials to be here, including the Associated Press, who is in this briefing room today.
But isn't it retaliatory in nature? And then yesterday we saw several prosecutors, I believe 12, fired from the Justice Department who worked on the investigations into the president.
CNN's Kaitlan Collins thought she was walking into a routine press briefing, but what happened next left her speechless on live television. White House spokesperson Karoline Leavitt didn't just answer questions, she systematically dismantled CNN's entire narrative with cold, hard facts. The room went dead silent as Collins frantically shuffled her papers, desperately searching for a follow-up that wouldn't further expose CNN's partisan agenda. This wasn't just a press briefing gone wrong, it was the exact moment when millions of Americans witnessed mainstream media's credibility collapse in real time. Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favor. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So did you click the subscribe button? Great, thank you so much. Now, back to the video. You've seen press conferences get heated before, but nothing quite compares to the moment Kaitlan Collins thought she had the upper hand with a series of legal gotcha questions, only to watch her entire strategy collapse in real time. The CNN anchor approached the microphone with that familiar look of confidence we've all seen before. That smirk that says, "I've got you now," as she launched into questions about White House funding freezes and Inspector General firings.
One, on the freeze in federal funding, who advised the president on the legality of telling government agencies that they don't have to spend?
That if we feel that there are lies being pushed by outlets in this room, we are going to hold those lies accountable.
Money that was already appropriated by Congress.
Well, as the OMB memo states, this is certainly within the confines of the law.
Collins clearly expected to catch Karoline Leavitt flat-footed. After all, this was the strategy CNN anchors had used successfully for years. Throw out complex legal accusations and watch as press secretaries stumble through vague responses. But what happened next shocked everyone in the press room. Instead of the defensive stammering Collins anticipated, Leavitt calmly pulled out a folder and began citing specific legal precedents that justified the administration's actions. "Ms. Collins, I'm glad you brought that up," Leavitt responded with unexpected confidence. The Presidential Records Act, specifically Section 2209, clearly establishes the executive authority in these matters. You could see the shift in Collins' demeanor instantly. That forward-leaning aggressive posture, gone. The smug certainty in her voice evaporated. As Leavitt continued methodically working through the legal framework, other reporters in the room began exchanging glances. This wasn't the usual press conference script they were used to. The real turning point came when Leavitt referenced the Supreme Court case Scala Law LLC versus Customs Bureau Protection. As Justice Thomas wrote in the majority opinion, Leavitt explained, "The executive branch maintains discretionary authority over implementation timing of congressionally approved budgets when procedural concerns are legitimately raised."
So White House counsel's office believes that this is within the president's power to do it, and therefore he's doing it.
Against reporters who don't use the language that you guys believe reporters should use. And how does that align with the First Amendment commitment that you were just talking about? So they disagree with lawmakers who say that they don't have the power to freeze this funding.
Again, I would point you to the language in the memo that clearly states this is within the law.
Collins frantically shuffled through her notes, clearly searching for a counter-argument that wasn't there. The trap she had so carefully set had completely backfired. Instead of exposing administration weakness, she had inadvertently given Leavitt the perfect platform to demonstrate mastery of constitutional law. What made this exchange particularly devastating was how Collins tried desperately to interrupt and redirect. "But what about the Inspector General's report that suggested," she began, only to have Leavitt cut her off with another precise legal citation. I'm familiar with that report, and if you'd read beyond page 14, you'd know it specifically acknowledges the administration's legal authority under the Burke-Hamilton Act of 2018. Leavitt countered. The press room went completely silent. This wasn't just a spokesperson defending policy decisions. This was a masterclass in constitutional law that exposed how superficial CNN's legal understanding actually was. Every time Collins attempted to pivot to a new angle, Leavitt seemed to anticipate the move before it happened. When Collins tried suggesting claiming the funding freeze violated congressional intent, Leavitt immediately referenced 3 previous Democratic administrations that had implemented identical measures without CNN raising a single objection.
All that happened on Friday night. The administration fired several inspectors general without giving Congress the 30-day legally required notification.
And you all have credentials to be here, including the Associated Press, who is in this briefing room today.
But isn't it? And then yesterday we saw several prosecutors, I believe 12, fired from the Justice Department who worked on the investigations into the president.
The body language told the whole story. As Leavitt continued her methodical dismantling of each accusation, Collins physically retreated from the microphone, leaning back as if trying to escape the barrage of facts. Other reporters who had come prepared to follow up on Collins's line of questioning suddenly became very interested in their notepads. What exactly did Leavitt say that left Collins completely speechless? The knockout moment came when Leavitt connected all the legal dots into a devastating conclusion. What we're seeing here isn't a genuine concern for constitutional process, Ms. Collins. It's selective outrage designed to generate headlines rather than inform your viewers. The legal framework I've just explained isn't obscure or contested. It's established precedent your network simply chooses to ignore when politically convenient. The brilliant strategy Leavitt employed wasn't just defending the administration's actions. She systematically exposed the fundamental dishonesty in how CNN frames legal issues. By the time she finished explaining the constitutional authorities at play, it wasn't just Collins who had been embarrassed. It was the entire corporate media apparatus that had spent years misrepresenting basic constitutional principles. Just when the legal smackdown was reaching its conclusion, Collins pivoted to what she thought was safer territory, the economy. But in doing so, she unwittingly stepped into an even more devastating trap that would expose years of CNN's economic reporting bias in just seconds of live television. With the constitutional lesson still hanging in the air, Collins launched into questions about rising prices, specifically targeting egg costs as evidence of the administration's economic failures. Her smug expression suggested she believed this was an easy win. After all, who could deny that Americans were paying more at the grocery store? What Collins didn't anticipate was Leavitt's immediate counterattack with precise data that CNN had conveniently ignored for months. Without missing a beat, Leavitt acknowledged that under Biden, egg prices had skyrocketed by a staggering 65%, while the president was either in the Oval Office or, quite frankly, asleep upstairs in the residence.
Career prosecutors, therefore they are afforded civil service protections. How is the administration deciding which laws to follow?
And getting to ask the president questions. We reserve the right to decide who gets to go into the Oval Office.
And which ones to ignore?
So it is the belief of this White House and the White House counsel's office that the president was within his executive authority.
The press room temperature seemed to drop several degrees as reporters realized they were witnessing something extraordinary. Instead of defensively explaining away inflation, Leavitt was turning Collins' own question into a spotlight on CNN's selective reporting practices. Let me explain something your network has failed to report, Leavitt continued, her voice steady as she revealed the Department of Agriculture had ordered the mass culling of over 100 million chickens, a fact CNN viewers would likely never have heard despite its direct connection to those egg prices Collins was so concerned about. You could practically see the panic setting in as Collins realized her economic attack was backfiring spectacularly. Where she expected defensive excuses, she instead faced a barrage of facts that systematically dismantled CNN's economic narrative. Several reporters exchanged uncomfortable glances, recognizing that Collins had walked directly into an ambush of her network's own making. The most revealing moment came when Collins attempted to interrupt Leavitt mid-explanation. Rather than yielding the floor, Leavitt calmly maintained control, continuing to explain how reckless economic policies and endless government spending were the actual culprits behind Americans' financial struggles.
Do that. He is the executive of the executive branch, and therefore he has the power to fire anyone within the executive branch that he wishes. And there are hundreds of outlets on this campus, many of you in this room who don't have the privilege of being part of that pool every single day too. There's also a case that went before the Supreme Court in 2020, Scala Law LLC versus the Customs.
Collins' frustration became increasingly visible with each passing second, her body language shifting from aggressive questioning to physical retreat. The rising costs of groceries, gasoline, and rent are direct results of this administration's economic approach, Leavitt stated matter-of-factly, highlighting how trillions in printed dollars coupled with the shutdown of American energy production had created the very crisis CNN was now attempting to blame on others. The contrast couldn't have been more stark. Where Collins came armed with talking points and political spin, Leavitt arrived with economic data and factual context that exposed the glaring holes in CNN's coverage. Other journalists in the room seemed to shrink in their seats, perhaps wondering if they too had been complicit in this selective reporting. As the economic discussion reached its climax, Collins's professionalism completely collapsed. Viewers at home witnessed something rarely captured on camera: a CNN anchor physically recoiling from facts being presented, frantically shuffling through her notes in a desperate attempt to find some counter-argument that might salvage her credibility. But there was nowhere to hide from the economic reality Leavitt was methodically laying out.
Bureau protection, I would advise you to look at that case, and that's the legality that this White House was wrestling. And nobody has the right to go into the Oval Office and ask the President of the United States questions. That's an invitation that is given.
Are you confident that if they bring lawsuits against you, those prosecutors who were fired, that they will succeed?
We will win in court, yes.
The moment perfectly encapsulated why millions of Americans have lost faith in corporate media outlets like CNN. When confronted with uncomfortable truths about the administration's economic record, Collins didn't engage with the substance of Leavitt's points. She attempted to interrupt, deflect, and eventually retreat. It wasn't just Collins who was exposed in that moment, but an entire media ecosystem that had spent years cherry-picking economic data to suit their preferred narrative. That media ecosystem was about to face its most damning exposure yet. Having failed on legal and economic grounds, Collins made her final stand on familiar territory, accusing Trump of undermining democratic institutions. What she never expected was for Leavitt to turn the tables and connect CNN's own rhetoric to the assassination attempts that nearly changed American history forever. Collins's face visibly tensed as she tried to regain control of the narrative, launching into a rehearsed monologue about threats to democracy. But instead of falling into the trap of defending Trump's specific actions, Leavitt calmly redirected the spotlight directly onto CNN itself. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees as journalists realized what was coming. Let's talk about undermining democracy, Leavitt began, her voice steady but with an unmistakable edge. The press room fell into an uncomfortable silence as she methodically dismantled years of CNN's reporting. She didn't just counter Collins's claims, she went straight for CNN's journalistic jugular. For years, CNN had pushed the Russia collusion narrative with breathless urgency across their platforms. Now, Leavitt wasn't letting them escape the consequences of that reporting. Your network spent years pushing the Russia collusion narrative that was later proven completely false, she stated firmly, making direct eye contact with Collins. That wasn't journalism, it was politically motivated fiction.
Personally direct this, given they worked on the classified documents investigation and the election interference investigation?
Well, first of all, let me just set the record straight. It is a privilege to cover this White House. It's a privilege to be the White House press secretary. This was a memo that went out by the Presidential Personnel Office, and the president is the leader of this White House, so yes.
Final thing for you, which White House official made the decision to bar the AP reporter from the Oval Office and the diplomatic reception room?
Other reporters began finding their notebooks suddenly fascinating, avoiding eye contact as Leavitt continued her methodical dissection of CNN's selective outrage. The tension in the room was palpable as she highlighted how the network had amplified politically motivated prosecutions against Trump while deliberately ignoring serious concerns about the Biden family's business dealings. Where was CNN's concern about political persecution when President Biden publicly stated he wanted to ensure Trump never holds power again? Leavitt asked, her question hanging in the air like a thunderclap. Collins's expression shifted from defensive to stunned as she realized there was no prepared response for this line of attack. But the most devastating moment came when Leavitt connected CNN's years of inflammatory rhetoric to real-world violence. The room grew deathly quiet as she referenced the 2 assassination attempts on Trump, suggesting that the attackers had been radicalized by the exact narrative CNN had been pushing for years. Your network has portrayed President Trump as an existential threat to democracy for years, Leavitt continued, her voice cutting through the silence. Have you ever considered that such rhetoric might have consequences? The question wasn't just rhetorical, it was an indictment of CNN's entire approach to covering Trump.
Before he goes and meets with him, withdrawing some forces, withdrawing all forces, anything like that?
Not that I'm aware of. That doesn't mean they don't exist.
Are they giving away bargaining chips before these negotiations have even started?
Again, I haven't talked to the president about Ukraine's NATO membership, but I was just talking with the president in our national security team. I wasn't made aware of any conditions, but if they exist, I'm happy to provide those.
Collins seemed to physically shrink in her chair, frantically shuffling through her notes as if searching for a response that simply wasn't there. This wasn't in the CNN playbook. No spokesperson had ever turned the tables so completely, transforming what should have been a routine press briefing into a public trial of CNN's journalistic failures. Other journalists in the room exchanged uncomfortable glances, perhaps recognizing their own outlets in Leavitt's critique. For years, they had operated within a media ecosystem that rewarded anti-Trump coverage regardless of accuracy. Now, that same ecosystem was being exposed in real time, with no commercial breaks to save them. As Collins struggled to regain her footing, Leavitt delivered her final devastating blow. The reality is this: President Trump isn't weaponizing the justice system. He's fighting back against a justice system that was already weaponized against him. The statement hung in the air, unanswered and unanswerable. The entire exchange perfectly captured why millions of Americans have lost faith in corporate news organizations. When confronted with their role in dividing the country, Collins couldn't defend CNN's years of selective reporting. She couldn't explain why the network had celebrated politically motivated prosecutions while claiming to defend democratic institutions. She couldn't justify CNN's decision to ignore Biden family corruption while obsessing over every Trump headline. Most damning of all, she couldn't deny Leavitt's central claim that CNN's portrayal of Trump as an existential threat had contributed to a climate where assassination attempts were seen as justified by some. As the press conference wound down, the damage to CNN's credibility wasn't just theoretical, it was visible on Collins's face. What we witnessed wasn't just a press briefing, it was the complete implosion of CNN's carefully constructed narrative in real time, broadcast for all to see. The unedited clips of this exchange spread like wildfire across social media, with hashtags like #CNN exposed and #fake news trending as millions of Americans finally saw mainstream media's manipulation exposed without the safety net of selective editing. This viral moment explains everything about CNN's plummeting ratings. While they're hemorrhaging viewers, independent media platforms continue gaining ground. Why? Because Americans are sick and tired of corporate news outlets that act as propaganda arms for one political party, while demonizing anyone who challenges their preferred narrative. Leavitt didn't just win an argument, she exposed the entire game. What other media confrontations do you think need to happen? Should more press secretaries come armed with facts instead of talking points? Let us know in the comments, and make sure to hit that subscribe button for more videos that hold the media accountable.